knowing what I know about your story and like, having come up through Dubspot and, worked in studios, it sounds like in a certain way, like, you inserted yourself into a community, and there's always been some form of that, like pretty close to you. And living in Denver, as you mentioned earlier too, right? There's so many producers there and there's a lot of live music.
Mm.
So for other people who are maybe feeling more isolated or lonely, what do you think would be helpful, maybe questions or things to try to help find, like, maybe some of those first kind of connections?
Yeah, man, that's a good question. It can be tricky depending on where the person lives. I think sometimes if you live in like the middle of absolutely nowhere of Arkansas, it might be a little difficult to connect with people in person. But online, I mean, there's so many Discord servers now and like places where people can connect online and get to know each other. I like to adopt the mentality of always give more than you take. And I think that's usually reciprocated back. Because if you're like, hey, here's another artist that's coming up, and I want to support him by sharing his stuff, going to his shows, being like, hey, can I run your merch table? Like, can I do this or that, whatever it is? I think that resonates with people. Like acts of kindness without expecting anything in return goes a really long way. And so if you can support other people and do that with that kind of mentality, I think eventually it's going to come back around, or people will take notice that like, oh, this guy is really like serving his community. Like he's really trying to be somebody who's helping support and make this thing work. And he's not asking for all this stuff in return. That goes a really long way, I think. And then like get yourself to the place of where you can showcase your talents because you're good enough and you can play with like the bigger players, and not just in the music industry. I think this applies to business and other stuff. Is like if you have a really great certain skill set and you have a good heart and you're a good person with good intentions and you put yourself out there proactively, eventually something's going to happen or something's going to stick. I really believe that. You've got to put yourself in the right place too, whether it's online or in person.
Very cool. So how do you think about rule following versus rule breaking when it comes to making music?
Dude, I'd say break all the rules, honestly. Like, screw it. Just break all of them, but only after you know what the rules are. And, like, so for example, like, I don't know what distortion or saturation is, but I'm just going to, like, to throw like 3,000 saturators and crank up the drive and just like might not get the best result. I mean, who knows? Try it. But my feeling is, if you know the fundamentals, it's a lot easier to break them. So I'm actually unlearning a lot of stuff I learned like in mixing school or whatever back in the day. Shout out to Danny Wyatt. He's awesome. I love him. He's been on the podcast a couple times. He's like a multi-platinum winning audio engineer, mastering engineer, taught me a lot of cool stuff. I think his site's Next Level Sound.
Okay.
Sorry, Danny. I'm pretty sure that's what it is online. But he does all these shootouts with plugins and like does mixing hacks and mastering tips and stuff. And I learned a lot from him in the early days. But there's even things that he shared or taught back then that I know he's not doing now that he's breaking. So, I've had to unlearn some of that stuff for
Mm.
myself and be like, you know what? It's okay to use multiple clippers on a master. like, like things like that, like are just crazy that you would normally never do or think is bad. So yeah, I mean, I think it's good to understand the technicalities. I like the quotes. And I don't know if I made this up if I heard it from somewhere else. So I don't want to take credit for it, but it's like, there are no rules, only technical facts. That's what it
Mm,
was.
that's cool.
Yeah.
So to that end, I mean, so let's talk about one of those, I guess maybe rules, if we want to call it that, gain staging. Why should we care about that one?
Because the loudness wars are terrible and nobody wins.
Mm,
And that's how I feel. Um, yeah, I mean, I typically measure a lot of my music with LUFS. I make louder dance music, so I try to aim between like, or, I don't know, -6, -7 LUFS. I'm pretty happy if I'm hitting there on a drop, the loudest part of the song. Um, Gain staging is important because um, you can really destroy the life out of your music and destroy the dynamics. Um, and if you destroy like the dynamics and you're doing some like bad digital clipping, then your music's not going to translate well on all of the speakers. Um, and if you want to make a song that sounds good in most places, you should probably care about gain staging. So, um, you know, that's why when I'm referencing, I'm always listening on my phone. I always listen on 4 different systems. So I listen to my car, I'll listen on my headphones, I'll listen on my phone, and then obviously my speakers.
Mm-hmm.
And if it sounds good on all those, then I'm happy. I'm like, good, it's done. Move on. Um, Gain staging, like, I sometimes hesitate to like giving actual numbers because it really just depends on the context of the music and the sounds being used and the genre. But if somebody's like forcing me to answer that as far as like an actual readout, if you're like newer and you're not sure quite how to gain stage, if you're making a dance track, usually try to have the kick hitting around minus 10 dB on the master. Like if you open Ableton, for example,
Mm-hmm.
and you have a readout of like minus 10 or something, that's usually where the kick's hitting. And then I'll add the bass around that and bring up that volume. And then I'll bring up like my lead instruments or sounds, and then my vocals, and then everything else.
Mm-hmm.
And if you could still have like a little bit of headroom, say like minus 2 or minus 3 dB left on the master without anything on the master, then that's a great starting place, I think, to have some headroom to start bringing up your limiter, doing some serial compression on your master, EQ, clip, whatever you do.
And then, so if there's a producer listening and maybe they're like, hey, I've never even thought about gain staging, or if there's somebody listening and they don't produce, but they're just interested, how would you simply define gain staging?
Just creating headroom across each track. So think of it as if you have a cup and you have a pitcher of water, right? And the pitcher of water represents all the sounds, and the cup is the master track. And you just start pouring in water into the cup. Eventually, if you just keep pouring it, it's going to overflow. So you want to be able to balance it with how much water for each individual track you're putting into that cup. The other thing to think about is the individual devices in the chain that you're building for every individual track is really important. I see a lot of people who are digitally clipping EQs and devices in their chain. And most like plugins or like an Ableton to the right of each device, like an EQ or compressor or whatever, you can see like a little meter. And if that meter is getting slammed into the red and then you throw an EQ and then you start boosting that EQ, you're going to be digitally clipping. So like use the input and the outputs to turn up or turn down how much volume and processing you're doing on each track. That makes a big difference.
Very cool. Yeah, I love that. It's, I mean, a super in the weeds and practical tip. Just paying attention to like what's happening to the signal as it passes through what you're processing it with. Very cool.
Yeah, I go back and look at some of my old projects and I'm like, ooh, this is bad.
You were following the feeling, man.
I was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then can you talk a little bit too about listening to tracks, like maybe in the context of mixing too, and is listening in solo versus listening in aggregate, like listening to an entire mix versus listening to individual channels and instruments?
Yeah, man. I try to do both. I think both are important. If you just solo everything, you're not going to have context of how it fits into a mix.
Mm,
So if I'm trying to be really detailed about something, I'll solo it. Like it's usually if it's EQ.
mm,
Um, if I'm trying to really EQ something, sometimes I'll solo it, but I always listen to it and adjust it or A/B test it in context with everything else. So like turn on and off the device, see if you made it better or worse. My other rule is I learned this from Corey Miller. Shout out to Corey, he's my friend. That he was the main engineer at the Lodge I mentioned back in the day. He's worked with like Eminem and B.O.B. and a lot of the great rap artists and everybody. But he told me, he's like, if you touch it more than 3 times, you're just playing with it. And I was like, honestly, that's kind of true. Uh, if you don't know if you made something better or worse after turning a single knob 3 times, you're fine. Just leave it where it was and move on. That's honestly such a small little thing, but it's been a game changer for me because you can get lost in that sauce, right? I feel like, is this better? Is it worse? I don't really know. And if you keep playing with it and you're still not sure after 3 times, just leave it.
Let me ask you this. What's the value of listening to something in solo when nobody who ever hears your song will ever hear any of the tracks individually?
Because you might actually hear like a hiss or something that doesn't stand out. And even though it's so small and not noticeable, especially when it comes to reductive EQ, if you're doing little things where you're cleaning up little tiny nodes here and there, your mix is going to sound tighter and cleaner in the end, even if it's minimal. That's a big thing. Like, for example, just like, I mean, this is kind of off that subject, but like just reductive EQ, like carving stuff out. Like, if I have like a lot of my sounds, if they don't have anything below like 200 hertz that's adding to the song, I'm cutting it. That gives so much more room for my kick and my bass to live. Um, Now I don't necessarily do that for every single thing, but for like main sounds that are really shining through, sometimes that can really make a difference. And you can get your tracks louder that way if you're cutting stuff that's unnecessary.
Very cool. Yeah, that's really cool, man. And I guess you want to talk a little bit about clipping and distortion in general, and maybe like I'm kind of hesitant to like maybe steer it more narrow than that. Is there anything that you want to say about clipping and distortion?
We do. We can go as deep as you want. I don't know if I have the right answer, but I most commonly now will clip my drums. There's a difference between soft clip and hard clip. A lot of times I'll hard clip stuff for like more aggressive sound design. Like if I have like a fuzzy, dirty bass sound or something, I'll sometimes hard clip that maybe. But it's kind of crazy. If you clip something, you actually get some volume back from it because all these different peaks and stuff aren't, when they're being chopped off and they're going through, say, the master, like kind of get some of that headroom back, because those peaks and those little chunks that are being shaved off with a clipper for like drums, especially like kick and snare, it allows your limiter, if you have a limiter on your master, some people just clip the master, that's fine too, but it actually makes your master not work as hard because it's not having to preserve those intense transients
Hmm.
of like a kick and snare. So my clipping workflow is usually I'll clip my kick, I'll clip my snare, usually run them through a limiter, not too aggressive because clipping is already doing a lot. And then I'll run that usually through a pre-master and then into my master. And then I have like my top drums I'm EQing out. I'm not really doing much to those except for compressing them, maybe a little. And then like hi-hats and shakers and stuff. Yeah, but clipping and distortion, if you want to make your tracks loud enough, I think you have to be doing that kind of thing. Saturation is basically compression. If you're distorting something, you're bringing up the volume and you're basically compressing those frequencies into themselves. So distortion is basically compression
Hmm.
at
Yeah.
its fundamental. Yeah, it'll definitely make your stuff louder. If you harmonically excite frequencies, it's a good time.
Yeah, right on. So before we get into these quick hits here, I want to, we've talked about the podcast, so everybody please go out and check out the Ableton Music Production Podcast. We're obviously going to link to that in the show notes. This man's been working hard for a long time, has a lot of really cool guests, and I can definitely speak from experience. A lot of like they get into a lot of different topics, and so another place to learn.
Thanks, man. I
Um,
appreciate that. Yeah, I've been digging your podcast too. I've been catching up on episodes.
Hey, real quick, if you're enjoying this episode, I've got a small favor to ask. Producer Head grows thanks to listeners and supporters like you. So if something here resonates, please take a second to follow, like, or subscribe. Your support means everything. By subscribing and sharing, you help us grow the Producer Head community, which allows us to continue bringing you incredible conversations like this and opens the door to even more exciting guests in the future. Let's keep building this together. Now, back to the episode. Yeah, I appreciate it, man. And so, aside from the podcast, is there anything else that you want to talk about in terms of what you got coming out or what's coming?
Um, Man, it's a good question. There's a lot of stuff. I mean, I have my Philia project. It's Philia. If you want to follow me, I'm mostly on Instagram for Ableton Podcast or Philia Music are my handles. If you're interested in getting to Ableton Live, I have like very basic like introductory courses on my site, liveproducersonline.com. There's also my Ableton chat bot on there. You can ask it a bunch of questions like, how do I make a fat bass sound like Skrillex or something with Ableton's wavetable? Like, it can help you with that. And that's pretty much it, man. I can't think of too many other things to shout out right now at the moment. Just working on a lot of music. podcast stuff.
Cool, man. Yeah. And like you said, at Philia Music. And again, all this will be linked in the show notes, but go check them out. And with that, let's drop into some of these. Feel free to be as kind of as brief or as long winded as you like.
Okay.
We'll go ahead and skip the doll question. He runs the Ableton Music Production Podcast. Three favorite
Sure.
albums.
Dude, man, I had a hard time coming up with three. I'd have to say, like, the first one that came to mind was Chasing the Golden Hour Part 4 by Grizz. I
Okay.
love Grizz. I like Grizz's stuff. Yeah, that's such a vibey track. It's like driving on Sunset Boulevard kind of vibes. So that's definitely one of them. Man, that's tough, dude. There's so many albums. That's probably one of the first ones that came to mind. I don't know. Go listen to your music. That's what I'll tell everybody. Any of your albums, go listen to your albums.
Very, very kind. Anything else you want to shout out?
I mean, dude, there's my Spotify is exploding every day with new stuff. It's kind of hard to narrow it down. I shout out my friend Rents, 53 Thieves. Love their stuff. They have a pretty solid couple albums. What You Do to Me, or I'm sorry, After Hours is an EP by them. It's pretty good too.
Yeah, I know that I'm definitely going to dig into 53 Thieves after this. I really appreciate this, you putting me onto that one, dude.
Yeah, dude, for sure. I was going to say, and maybe you can cut this out because it's going to take me a second to find it, but there was
Shout out to
a
Matthew
guy.
Diaz.
Yeah, man, Helado Negro. He was on the podcast, and my podcast manager told me to have him on, and I listened to his music and really started digging his stuff. It's got kind of like a Toro y Moi kind of vibe. It's like he's got like this kind of vintage synthwave, kind of like indie, kind of alternative vibe, and I really like his music. Helado Negro. He has his newer album slaps. It's super vibey. The name of the album is Phasor.
Best music related purchase you've ever made for $100 or less.
Dude, I don't know if there are any. Honestly, like we chose an expensive hobby, man. I know it's more than $100, but if you have a student discount, you can get Pro Q4 for less than that. Pro Q3, Pro Q4, probably the best EQ in my opinion. I'm obsessed. If you need a good EQ, dynamic EQ. Mixed in Key is a plugin that it's a standalone, and the Mixed in Key Live plugin, that's where it's at. And I use that to like tune my kick drums and
interesting
samples and stuff. So I like that. And you can just play anything on Spotify. It'll tell you the key and the tempo right away. So I wish they made a mobile app for it, because there's been times when I'm putting a set together and I'm like, yo, this is a sick song. Like, what key is this in? Would it fit? It'd be nice if somebody made a mobile app like that. I know this is like $150, but the headphones I'm wearing right now, the M50X Audio Technica, love these headphones. They're good for a lot of stuff. As far as like music related, there's a subscription I use called Hyped It. I don't know if you ever used it.
No,
Hypedit.com. It's like HYPPEDIT. They've got some tools that you can use to do like link gates. So I've got a new release, and then you can have people take steps or actions like follow you on Spotify, repost a post, all these different actions you can take to help gain a following. And then you can reward them with like whatever you want. Like, oh, here's early access to my song. I ran a campaign on Hyped It today for my new song that came out today. So yeah, that's a cool platform. It's pretty cheap. I want to say it's like $10 a month. I don't know. I think it still is. That's a great tool for artists. And then ChatGPT Plus, man. I use that. They rolled out like a new Dolly 4 or 5, and can use that for image generation for artwork, or just asking it questions. Like, I've trained it on a lot of different things of mine, and I use it all the time. Or weights.com.
Very
That's
cool.
the other one I mentioned.
Yeah, we got all that. I'm going to do my best to get all this into the show notes. Shout out to Matthew Diaz, the producer.
Dude, sorry.
With this. No, it's
sorry about that.
No, man. I mean, it's good, man. Like fun resources, things to play with that I've never heard of before. And I'm sure if I haven't heard of it, there's got to be at least somebody else who doesn't know. I could be the only one, though. So, something you bought and never used.
Dude, I've got a lot of that. The Genki Wave Ring. I don't really use it, but it's a Bluetooth ring that you can map to say like a filter or something. So it's like more of like a party trick, I think. I know somebody who uses it for recording, because if you're recording by yourself, it's a pain, like playing drums or whatever, to run over and hit record.
Yeah.
And stop and whatever. So you can actually map it to actions. So he uses it for tracking like guitar. So he'll be across the studio room away from his computer, hit a button to start recording a new track, hit stop, hit like overdub. So it's a cool ring that you can use for that. And it's been collecting dust in my closet. They sent me one. The Voclia Doubler is another one. It's like a instant audio to MIDI mic.
Mm.
And it works for the most part pretty good in the standalone app, but I noticed there's a little bit of latency issues when you're running it directly in the DAW with some plugins. So that's just been sitting in my closet too.
Yeah, it happens, man. One habit that gets in the way of your music.
Finishing. Just like finishing is the hardest part. Comparing myself to other tracks or other artists in the moment, that always sucks. Things that get in the way of my music, probably my girlfriend. No, I'm just kidding. Don't tell her I said that. No, she's awesome. Shout out to Emily. She's very encouraging. But yeah, we do go like skiing and stuff. So it does take away from music, but also you got to have that. So sometimes it's good to step away and take a break.
Something you wish more people understood about music and or production.
Uh, Honestly, just like how much hard work and stress it takes to successfully master and promote a song. It's a lot of work, dude. I mean, anybody who's done it knows. Yeah, I wish more people from the listener side realized how much work and a toll it can take on artists for that whole process. Maybe they would share it and appreciate it a little more.
Someone else you'd like to hear from on Producer Head. I guess given that you host a podcast, this is a funnier question to ask you than the average producer.
Rick Rubin.
Yeah.
Get him on the podcast. Hit him up. You never know, dude. He might say yes.
Yeah, I'll see him later today.
Let's see. Alberto Chapa. He's a friend of mine. He works at Ableton and he's the head of sales. And he's been on the podcast twice. He's a great guest. He's very knowledgeable, knows a lot about music in the industry, very, very passionate about education and teaching. He might be a good person.
That's cool, man. I would love to talk to somebody from Able. That's a really cool idea and a different angle. I love that. Keep it in mind.
Super nice guy.
Yeah. I'll probably hit you up offline about that actually.
Yeah, do it.
Cool, man. Favorite movie?
Have you ever heard of UHF?
No.
It was like Weird Al Yankovic's like first movie.
Oh,
it was
wow,
like
really?
so like way back in the day. It's the dumbest movie you'll ever watch in your life. Like literally the stupidest thing you'll ever watch. But I love it because of that. Hot Rod, another classic.
Andy Samberg. Yeah.
Yeah, I love Hot Rod. Have you seen Severance, the new TV show?
I just watched episode 4 last night of the second season, so don't spoil it for me. But dude, wow.
So good.
Yeah.
I love it. It
I'm a
gets
big
crazier.
fan.
Just hang in there. It gets more wild.
Yeah, the first season, man, I was waiting so long. I mean, when I saw that first season, I was like, wow, this show's what really impresses me about that show is how internally consistent it is. You know what I mean? It's like really hard to punch holes in the story. It's so well constructed. And I'm just like, wow, it's like they really created a world where like you don't really have to suspend like disbelief. You know what I mean? It's like this is all it's all so it's really well put together. I'm really, and I think visually it's incredible. Yeah, like the characters are super fun.
The soundtrack's killer too. Like it's a great. I love I love the music in it. It's great. Yeah, it's definitely a good show. If anybody hasn't seen it, get on it.
Yeah, so a friend of mine went to college with the guy that created that show.
No way.
Yeah, so it really it's so cool to see like that. Yeah, like you know it's something that like took off for him. It's really wild.
There's a lot of good shows on Apple that I've never realized. They've got pretty decent. I mean, their model is very different than Netflix. Netflix is all about like a quantity of shows, like how much can we crank out consistently, and Apple is very different. They're more of like, let's focus on only quality, even if it means we release way less.
Yeah,
which I like. I like that approach better.
Yeah, man. I would definitely agree that at this point, they're definitely not even, you know, they don't seem to be competing on the quantity angle at all. You know, in the library, it's a different kind of thing. They're playing a different game. But over time, you know, we'll see where it goes. But I agree, man. I mean, Severance. If anyone hasn't seen it, I'm not even like somebody who like runs around talking about shows that much. But that show, for some reason, really rocks me. I've been very impressed with it.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Best advice that you received and used.
Honestly, that 3 times rule I mentioned, like, I like that when it comes to especially mixing and stuff. There's a book called Letting Go by David Hawkins that I was encouraged by a friend to read, and I started. and it has some good stuff in there. And it's all about just being able to let go of like negative emotions or anxiety or feelings and understanding why you're feeling the way you're feeling in the moment and the impact it has on you. But there's like a mantra in there that like he encourages you to like quote. The saying is, I will not accept invalidation from others or myself. I choose to accept all that is positive in myself and others. And I like that because it's easy to get in your own head, especially as a creative and putting yourself out there and being vulnerable. So I just think that's a good mantra. Like that's one of the things I like to think through.
That's cool, man. Yeah, David Hawkins, Letting Go. We'll link that also. Again, shout out to our producer, Matthew Diaz, who's going to help me get all this in the show notes.
Yo, shout out to Matthew. I'm going to send him a Christmas card or something.
There we go. Let's see. What character from a book, movie, show, etc. do you most identify with?
Jesus. No, I'm just kidding. Sorry. I mean, shout out to Jesus. He gets a bad rap though, man. I think a lot of people are hating on him. He's a good dude. Doing good things. So what else? I did have somebody mistake me for Justin Timberlake at a Denny's once, which I thought was hilarious. I think they were super drunk, but they were like, Justin. And I just like went along with it because I was like, sure. So I was just like, yo, what's up, guys? How's it going? And they took pictures with me and like, they're like, what are you doing here? I was like, oh, I'm on tour. I love Denny's. My bus is parked out back. They're like, awesome. Yeah. They probably woke up the next morning, looked at their phone and like, who's this dude?
So I guess we'll go with Justin Timberlake then.
Yeah.
Kind of trying something different here. So I have a question from the previous guest. But before that, I would like to ask you to leave a question for the next guest that I will ask them.
Let's say the funniest story in the studio or performing live. I like that question. I'm going to use that for my podcast.
There you go. And I'm glad to hear it, man. So, and then here's the question that was left for you. So, knowing what you know now, what advice would you give to your younger self about making music?
I'd say be my younger self. Amazing. I'd say from a business standpoint, focus more on the branding of what you do with your music and getting involved with connecting and networking with other artists and being intentional about that more so. I'd say from a creative standpoint, just getting out of your head and enjoy the process of making music and not worry about the end result so much while you're making it.
Love it, man. Anything else for us, man? That's all I have for you.
I don't think so, dude. Thank you for having me on the podcast, man. This has been fun.
No, man, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for making the time.
Absolutely, dude. Thanks for reaching out. And if you're ever in the Denver neighborhood, hit me up. You've got a place to crash and you can meet my dog. He's crazy. Yeah, it'd be a good time. I don't know if you ski or snowboard or anything. I live really close to the slopes.
Nice, man. Yeah, dude, I have a lot of friends in Denver, so I usually come out at least once or twice a year. And so next time I'm out there, I'll definitely let you know, and we'll make something happen.
Do it, dude.
Yeah.
Are you playing any shows?
I don't have anything lined up at the moment, man. But you know, maybe that's something we can talk about too. You know, if I can support you in any way, let me know. And
thanks, man.
I mean, yeah, I appreciate. I mean, you know, dude, your commitment to music through having this podcast for years, having this project for years, what you do in your local community, what you do to educate people all over the place, you know, through the content and through the other stuff you try to do through like one-on-one lessons. Like, it's just really dope. I encourage everybody listening to check you out. If you're looking for a teacher, this guy knows what the fuck he's talking about. Don't hesitate to hit him up. Like I said, we'll link everything. Thank you so much, man. This has been Toru, and in a way, so are you. We will catch you next time on Producer Head.
Yeah, man. Peace.
Peace. That's it for my conversation with Dan Giffin. There are so many valuable insights here for producers at all levels, from his approach to gain staging and clipping, his perspective on learning the rules so that you may break them. Whether you're looking to improve your technical skills or find inspiration in your creative process, Dan's experience offers something for everyone. On the next episode of Producer Head, you'll get to hear my conversation with electronic jazz pioneer, composer, pianist, and producer Mark DeClive Lowe. Tune in. I promise you do not want to miss this one. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, share with a friend, and leave a rating and review wherever you're listening. This helps Producer Head find its place and its people. Without you, there is no Producer Head. Thanks again for tuning into Producer Head. Subscribe and join our community over at producerhead.substack.com so you never miss an episode. Substack subscribers receive exclusive access to the biweekly podium, the curation of my favorite discoveries on and offline over the past week. You'll also get access to Producer Head Bars, where I share the best of what's been shared with me to help you and other producers in our community grow. The podium and Producer Head Bars are designed to provide immediate inspiration and direct application in your creative process. So, subscribe at producerhead.substack.com to receive real inspiration and ideas you can use to elevate your own process today. If you care for the craft, get your exclusive access at producerhead.substack.com. This episode was co-produced, engineered, and edited by Matthew Diaz. Big thank you to him. From Producer Head, this is Toru, and in a way, so are you. Peace.